Live from Jerusalem, you're listening to Israel-Inspired Radio on Voice of Israel. Here are your hosts, Rabbis Ari Abramowitz and Jeremy Gimpel.
Shalom and welcome to Israel Inspired on Voice of Israel. That's at voiceofisrael.com. That's where you can find us. We have with us Dr. Emmanuel Navon. He's a university lecturer. He's an author, a news commentator, public speaker, and really a voice that is not heard enough out of Israel and that needs to be heard more than anything else right now. We're featuring him to discuss primarily his new book, The Victory of Zionism. Emmanuel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So let's just start here. What is the victory of Zionism? What's our victory?
Well, the victory, first of all, is the title of the book, obviously, is an answer to the title of another book, The Crisis of Zionism, a book by Peter Beinart, which was published about a year or two ago in America, and that has been making a lot of noise. So Peter Beinart talks about the crisis of Zionism. I talk about the victory of Zionism.
Just one bit of criticism I want to put in here for you, and that is that I think you're giving Peter Beinart a little bit too much credit. I appreciate the fact he wrote his book because it inspired the victory of Zionism, but I think maybe his mother, his grandmother, and a few friends bought his book. I don't think it's really getting out there, but hopefully yours really will and is so far. So go ahead. I just had to say that.
Well, hopefully, unfortunately, I suspect that more people than his immediate family bought the book because in America, unfortunately, his book did have an impact, and it, of course, has become kind of the Bible of the J Street of the world. And unfortunately, he's invited a lot on campuses by Hillel, Open Hillel, J Street, and all these conferences in America. And he's actually making a lot of noise. So I do believe that we need an answer to that. And we need to address his claims, and this is what I do in my book.
So give us the primary claim, the premise of his book, The Crisis of Zionism.
Well, basically what Peter Beinart is saying is his attitude to Israel today is pretty similar to the attitude of German Jews to Eastern Jews in the 1930s, which is, we live in the perfect country, people love us, we're perfectly integrated, and if it wasn't for you, I mean, when they say for you, today American Jews to Israel, and yesterday German Jews to East European Jews, if it wasn't for you, who are a complete embarrassment, the world would be perfect. So do us a favor, just change your attitude, behave the way we're going to tell you how to behave, and this way, we won't have to be embarrassed by you anymore. So what Peter Beinart is saying basically is that the ultimate for Jews is to be American Jews, unfortunately for their image in America and for their social status in America. There is this huge embarrassment, which is called Israel, the state of Israel, that has all these horrible things, such as occupation and depriving people their rights and being the main source of conflict in the Middle East and in the world. So what he's telling us basically is to do A, B, and C according to what he's expecting from us to do. And this way, of course, the world will be a perfect place. Of course, most and foremost, we have immediately to establish the Palestinian state according to Peter Beinart. And of course, according to him, if we do that, it will also solve all of Israel's problems because according to him, establishing what he calls a Palestinian state will guarantee Israel's future as a democratic and Jewish country. It will solve the Arab-Israeli conflict, and it will dramatically improve Israel's international standing. It really sounds too good to be true, right? And that's what I'm saying in my book. If it's too good to be true, then it's not true.
What do you think? Before we get into the victory of Zionism, people like Peter Beinart to me are less individuals and more of a pathology or a phenomenon. I'm fascinated to understand what is compelling him, whether he really believes the thing he's saying, whether he can look at Israel surrounded by 23 Arab states, 57 Muslim states, totalitarian, dictatorial, repressive, and Israel is this light of innovation and inclusion. How could he see us as the bad guys? How does that make sense? The guy's not stupid.
Well, I don't think he really sees Israel as a bad guy, but I think that his attitude to Israel is basically to expect from us things that he wouldn't even expect from America. He really seems to believe that Israel has the ability of solving problems in the Middle East, of basically turning into this perfect place. Just by withdrawing from Judea and Samaria, everything will be all right. And I think that the problem with Peter Beinart and liberal Jews is that they do not understand the difference between reality and fantasies, between reality as it is and reality as it should be according to them. So according to Peter Beinart, you just have to wish for something to happen in order for it to happen. So just for him to say that Israel should basically withdraw from Judea and Samaria, and then there will be peace in the Middle East and everybody will love us, he wants it so much that it just blinds him. It simply blinds him.
So if this was merely him saying that this is his pragmatic, strategic approach to the issue, but he still sees Israel as having always and continuing to this day taking the moral high ground, that's one thing. And I'm going to launch into your book itself, but I want to ask you this question. It seems like every liberal in the world would be lining up to stand with Israel, which is the beacon of liberalism and liberal democracy in the world, and instead they're siding against Israel with armies and nations and a religion that is antithetical to every single liberal belief. I can't make sense of that either. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, the answer is that they're not liberals. They call themselves liberals, but they're not. They're people who have this deep hatred of Israel, but not only of Israel, also of many Western values. And just because they call themselves liberals does not mean that they are. The same way that all these organizations, all these NGOs that call themselves human rights organizations, they're not human rights organizations. That's why people get confused, because they say, oh, well, if these people call themselves liberals, they must be liberal. If those organizations call themselves human rights organizations, they must be human rights organizations, but they're not. These people are not liberal. They have this deep hatred of Western values, of Jewish values, and of Christian values. And that's why they're fighting Israel, and this is why they're siding with the darkest forces in the world today, radical Islam, but also radical secular ideologies in the West. And it's not by coincidence that many of these radical leftists in Europe and in America are basically in bed with the most radical Islamists. So again, the fact that they call themselves liberals should not fool anybody. They're not liberal. Alan Dershowitz, he is a liberal and he's pro-Israel. It does make sense because he understands what Israel stands for, and because he's a true liberal, he's pro-Israel. But the people who are being so anti-Israel, calling themselves liberals, are simply not liberals.
So you're saying that they hijacked the term liberal and used it for their own cause, and I would have to agree with you. I think that was one of the... I've been asking this question to a number of different people, and yours was definitely among the more articulate, logical answers I've gotten. And because you're right, they're not liberals. If anything, we should call them leftists. Somehow leftists and liberals have become confused and synonymous when really they're not. There's liberal values, but leftists are more of a malignant ideology that we've seen many times in history, and perhaps it is that element of jihad that both of them hold that they're sort of bedfellows right now, because they're seeking to take down the current system, which is values-based and nationalistic. Okay, I definitely hear that.
Which, by the way, also has to do with the misuse of the word liberal, because the original meaning of the word liberal in British English is somebody who believes in personal freedom, in political and economic freedoms. And today, people who believe in personal freedom and in economic freedom are people from the right, people who are pro-free market. That's the original meaning of the word liberal. But this word today has been hijacked and denaturalized in modern American English, and what people mean by liberal today is left-wing, but these are two different things. The original meaning of liberal is somebody who believes in personal freedom.
So tell me, before I almost want to wait. We're going to take a soft break very soon. I want to wait before I really launch into the book and get onto details there. But I'm wondering, you wrote this book, The Victory of Zionism, here at the Crisis. Is there a way we can somehow arrange a debate between the two of you? Because I think that it has yet to be as clearly lined up two opposite sides of the spectrum, and I think you would really nail him on that. If we set that up here at Voice of Israel, would you come and debate him?
Absolutely. I mean, actually, as a matter of fact, so that you know, I emailed Peter Beinart offering to debate him publicly in America, and he actually agreed. So I'm sure that, we can also do it on the radio, but on principle, he did agree to debate me.
So he agreed to debate you. I think here at Voice of Israel, I can speak for the station. We'd love to host that here in Jerusalem as well. We have 1 minute before the soft break. Let me just ask you, and then we're going to launch into details, I promise. The victory of Zionism. Give me the thesis like you did for the Crisis. What is our greatest victory?
Well, our greatest victory today is that we are a success story surrounded by failed states. And we are attracting Aliyah, Jewish immigration. We are a country of innovation, of progress, of economic growth, a country that gives hope to the Jewish people around the world and to free people also who are not Jewish. And I think, as I said, the bottom line is that we are a success story surrounded by failed states.
A beacon of freedom and liberty, not only for Jews, but for all the people in the world. We will be right back. We have a soft break, station ID. Do not touch the dial. We'll be right back with Dr. Emmanuel Navon. We are back. Dr. Emmanuel Navon, university lecturer, author, news commentator, public speaker. His new book, The Victory of Zionism. We're hearing here in Israel all the time from so many different sources, mainstream media, is that it's just not a plausible idea for Israel to continue perpetuating an existence because the demography is simply against us. You come and say that's definitely not the truth. Time is on our side. Why? How's that possible?
Well, first of all, time is on our side, as I said before, because you just have to look at the history of Israel and of the Middle East for the past 100 years. And we are a success story. We are making progress. We have turned this desert into a blooming economy, into a successful country. And our neighbors, our Arab neighbors, have been basically declining for the past 100 years. So first of all, objectively, when you compare Israel's achievements and on the other hand, where the Arab world is today, where it was 50 or 60 years ago, basically it has been declining. Objectively, from that point of view, time is on Israel's side. But also when it comes to demography, I think only in Israel is demographics not a science, but it mixes politics with math. Because whenever people want to make a political claim when it comes to demographics, first of all, people check their politics before they check their figures. So, for example, as you know, Yoram Ettinger has been challenging the figures produced by the Palestinian Authority about the actual number of Arabs between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. And whenever demographers in Israeli academia, such as Sergio de la Pergola or Arnon Sofer, try to criticize Ettinger, they don't actually try to challenge his figures. What they claim is that, well, the guy is not a professional demographer, and he's right-wing anyway, so who cares about what he says? That's basically the level of the debate. Now, the figures produced by the PLO, by the Palestinian Authority for the past 20 years, have always proven to be wrong. I mean, they keep saying that, in 5 years, in 2 years, in 7 years, there's going to be an Arab majority. They've been saying it for the past 20 years, but it's never happened. And when you look at the actual figures, there's been a decline in the fertility rate of the Arabs, an increase of the fertility rate of the Jews. There's been negative Arab immigration out of Israel to the rest of the world. There's been an increase of Jewish immigration of Aliyah, especially in the past few years from Europe and from France. So this, this demographic bomb, it's never blown, and it's never going to blow because the figures are wrong.
So one of your most bold and controversial assertions is that you believe that Israel should legally define itself as a Jewish state. Now, when we're hearing this demographic problem and that time is on our side, let's say that that's true, that time is on our side, and I definitely do believe you. To me, that's just a happenstance circumstance. We're facing a much bigger issue, of which that it is a symptom, which is an identity crisis. Is there not a conflict between a Jewish state and a democratic, at least democratic in the conventional term, a use of the term democratic state? Because let's say that they were right and demography really isn't on our side. And even if it is on our side, if the world thinks it's not, then it's not. So if they have a majority, can they just vote us out of being a Jewish state? That's what a democracy would indicate. Is there not a conflict between these two?
No, there isn't. As a matter of fact, most countries in the world today are nation states. It's definitely true of the 28 countries of the European Union, with the exception of Belgium. They're all nation states, which means that they belong to a dominant nation, but they're also democracies. There's absolutely no contradiction between being the nation state of one specific nation, whether it's the Czech nation, the French nation, the German nation, and being a democracy that grants equal civil rights to all its citizens, including its minorities. So in that sense, Israel is no exception. We are a nation state in that we are the nation state of a dominant nation, in our case, the Jewish nation, in the case of Japan, the Japanese nation, etc., but we're also a democracy. There's absolutely no contradiction. But I find it amusing that the people who are making this case against Israel think, oh, you cannot be a nation state and a democracy, which, as I said, is complete nonsense, because all the countries of the European Union, except Belgium, which is a binational state, they're all nation states and democracies. So why wouldn't it work for Israel? Of course it's true also for Israel. But look who's talking. Who's saying that? The Arab countries. Now, can you point out to any Arab nation state that is a democracy? No. They're the one claiming that you cannot be a nation state and a democracy. Well, they should know, because none of them are democracies. But in the case of Israel, and in the case of most nation states in the world, of course you can be a nation state and a democracy. Now, of course, I'm aware of the fact that what they're saying also is that, oh yes, but in the case of Israel, the reason why you cannot be a Jewish state and a democracy is not because there's a contradiction between nationalism and national identity and democracy. It's because you, the Jews, you're not a nation. You're just a religion. Well, of course, that also is nonsense. The Jewish people is both a nation and a religion. And the fact that in the Jewish national identity there's a special place to religion is not unique to the Jewish people. It's true of many other nation states. I mean, the Japanese, for example, the Shinto religion is specific to the Japanese nation. Catholicism is part of the national identity of Ireland or of Poland. Calvinism is the official religion of Denmark. The Queen of England is both the head of state and the head of the Anglican Church. So it's not only in the case of the Jewish people that there's a special place of religion in the definition of national identity.
Right.
The bottom line is there's no contradiction.
But Denmark would still be Denmark, even if they had a Calvinistic minority and they ruled that it was no longer a Calvinistic state. My question isn't so much about the hypocrisy, which is obvious, of dictatorial, repressive Arab regimes lecturing us on democracy, but actually an internal one. Because, yes, democratic nature is fundamental, I think, to the Jewish philosophy. But the question is, what are we primarily? Are we primarily a Jewish state and secondarily a democratic one, or primarily democratic and secondarily a Jewish state? Because when these two things do come into conflict, I agree with you, there is no necessary conflict. But when it happens that they do surpass us, and there's 65, 70%, if that were ever in a science fiction scenario to happen, Arabs in Israel, then we are facing a real challenge in how we define ourselves, which is, I suppose, why you were saying that you want there to be a legal definition that we're a Jewish state.
No, the reason why I support the law for the legal definition of Israel as a Jewish state actually has nothing to do with demography. It has to do with the fact that for the past 20 years, there has been in Israel what has been called the constitutional revolution of judicial activism, of basically a Supreme Court that has been challenging and canceling the laws passed by the Knesset and government decision. And over the past 20 years, instead of a separation of powers in Israel, we have a hierarchy of powers dominated by the judiciary. And the Supreme Court is being used by radical leftist organizations funded by the European Union and by European governments in order to challenge the very Jewish identity of Israel. And to give you just a few examples, in 2000, the Supreme Court ruled in the Katan case that the Jewish agencies should not only buy lands for the Jews, but also for Arabs, even though the same court said that the Jews are not allowed to buy land in Arab towns. In 2006 and 2012, the Supreme Court was petitioned in order to cancel the citizenship law, in order to grant automatic citizenship of Arabs from Judea and Samaria who marry Arabs from Israel, and therefore basically to implement, to force upon Israel the so-called right of return from the back door. And as you see, the very Jewish, all the symbols and all the laws that have to do with Israel's identity as a Jewish state are being challenged in the court. And the reason why the court is always making those decisions against the Jewish identity of Israel is because there's no law in Israel that states openly that Israel is a Jewish country. Now, we have in the Declaration of Independence, it says in the Declaration of Independence that Israel is a Jewish state, except there was a court decision at the Supreme Court in 1948 that said that the Declaration of Independence has no legal and constitutional value, and therefore Israel is a Jewish state de facto, but not de jure. So you can today challenge Israel's Jewish identity because we do not have a law that says officially that Israel is a Jewish nation.
So this is not really a new initiative. In some ways, you're just taking it back to what it was before an activist judicial system changed that. But I want to shift to the subject for 1 second because we have under 2 minutes, just a minute plus. So I want to ask you a big question that you have a small time to answer. In your book, you start talking about other countries, Israel reaching out to Africa, and perhaps that was part of the reason Nigeria abstained in the UN vote. Do you think Israel should be focusing and developing ties in Africa and other places around the world?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, Africa today, many African countries are Christian countries, and they're very pro-Israel, and they're threatened by Muslim terrorism. And they see in Israel their natural partner to fight this radical Islam, whether it's Boko Haram in Nigeria or Al-Shabaab in different countries in East Africa. And they see in Israel a natural partner to fight this radical Islam, and Israel has to take advantage of this. And the fact that they abstain at the Security Council, not only Nigeria but also Rwanda, shows that we have friends there. We have to be proactive and take advantage of it.
That is definitely a testimony to work well done. I don't know that we had that intention, but nonetheless, it was definitely work well done. We have Dr. Emmanuel Navon. Thank you so much for joining us, speaking a positive message about Israel, assuming the mantle of leadership globally. The book is Victory of Zionism.